Medications that help with craving reduction and those types of things, but the research is ongoing, and certainly I think in some sense we have fallen a bit short. But yeah.
Because I know those medications are out there, but I just really don't hear of those being used very much. Do you see those being prescribed by physicians?
I do, quite often in our practice, and I know in the prior place that I worked, Central Kansas Foundation, they do suggest those medications, and upon withdrawal to make sure that we're safe if we're withdrawing from alcohol. I think that's something that people need to know too, that alcohol is one of the only things you can die from just abruptly stopping if you've been regularly drinking, and so making sure that you seek medical advice and whether or not you might be prone to seizures or delirium tremens, DTs.
You know what? That's shocking. I'm a registered nurse, and I guess I never even thought about going cold turkey on alcohol could be that serious of a hazard, of sudden death from just abruptly quitting. I would assume, though, they have to have a certain level of addiction, correct?
Yeah, certainly. There's got to be a ongoing
pretty severe alcoholism to just stop suddenly could cause, a collapse of systems and then subsequent death. What do you see as far as what substances? I'm sure you treat all of them, but what are the most common? What are the top 2 or 3?
The top 2 or 3, alcohol, marijuana, and then probably methamphetamine after that.
Oh, geez, methamphetamine here. You're talking here in Salina, in our community.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting you bring up marijuana because, there's so many people that do not see that as an addictive substance. Mm-hmm. So address that.
Certainly, in my terms, it's not the substance that you're using, it's why that you're using it, and the severity and consequences that you're having for using it. And so I think that a lot of people see marijuana as not as big of an issue, but I've seen it cause some significant problems in family and in amotivational syndrome, in terms of I'm not doing the things that I need to be doing, getting up, going to work, being productive, feeling like being productive, really. And there's some interesting brain research on that too, and in the fact that it kind of slows the neural impulse down eventually with kind of sticks in the myelin sheath, which is the fatty tissue in the neurons. And so we get kind of this duh thing going on where people have a hard time with short-term memory and so forth.
And it stays in the system how long?
It stays in if you've been regularly using, because it's soluble in fat, it stays in the urine for a month or even more. So it's detectable for a significant amount of time, but yeah.
Because I've always heard it wasn't physiologically addicting, more psychologically, but you're giving some physiological information about how it does affect the body and the neurons, etc. Mm-hmm. So there is some new information kind of coming out, or am I just kind of hearing... look at all these states that have legalized marijuana. I mean, I always love how, Snoop Dogg, talks about Dr. Dre was the one who gave him his prescription for medical marijuana.
Oh, dear.
Honestly, I've known of people and heard of people that go into these states where it is legal, and I'm like, well, why are you getting it? You don't have any condition. And they're like, well, I can find a doctor. I don't know what kind of doctor it takes to prescribe those things, but that they can get it. So
yeah, they are. It's very rampant in other states. I travel to Colorado yearly, and yeah, the medical marijuana dispensaries are on every corner. So yeah.
So you, as an addiction specialist, what is your personal opinion about legalizing marijuana?
Well, gosh.
Federally, because again, some states do have it legally.
Yeah.
We have legal alcohol, and that was your #1 drug that you mentioned with addictions.
Yeah. Again, I think that it's not the substance or even the legal ramifications personally, because addiction is a disease. I don't know that punishment is appropriate. If we had diabetes and we had a relapse and we made a bad choice in terms of what we were eating, we wouldn't go to jail for that. But on the other hand, sometimes that consequence is the only thing that saves a life. So I kind of feel 2 ways about that, I guess. So yeah.
Well, that's a good opinion to give us, because I think it's not so much the substance or the legality, it's how it affects your life.
Yeah.
But we're going to have to take a little bit of a break. This is a very interesting conversation here with our addiction specialist. You're listening to Joan on the Joan Jerkovich Show, and be sure to go to my web website, joanjerkovich.com, to catch the video outtakes, podcasts, and links to iTunes. We'll be right back. It's 910 KINA, Salina. A lot of good information. Wow.
Oh my gosh, I can't even tell you my credentials. I froze.
No. You know, and again, you know, it's my job to kind of jump in and you know, throw something out there, and we all stumble. But you know, if you listen to Sirius Radio and you listen to people who do this 5 days a week, you know, all day basically, you know, it's just called live. It's just kind of like talking, you know. Yeah. But I'm so surprised. You've given me some real information. I thought I knew quite a bit about this subject, but you've actually given me some real information that was news to me. Let's see. I'm just going to get my thoughts together, and we're going to pop back into another short 8 minutes. Okay. And we're still rolling, right, Ben?
Yeah, whenever you want.
Welcome back, listeners. This is Joan with the Joan Jerkovich Show on 910 KINA Salina. We're wrapping up our conversation here with our addiction specialist, Summer Rhodes. And Summer, I'm going to get into talking about relapse. This is such a part of addiction. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think sometimes relapse is part of the process, and as long as we kind of avoid the demoralization of that process and the shame basis of that process, sometimes we get so stuck in shame that we don't get back on the bus, right? We kind of stay in the addiction, and I mean, there's a difference between shame and guilt. Guilt is I feel bad about what I've done. Shame is I feel like I'm a bad person. And so if we can, okay, what did I do different? What can I do differently next time? Kind of examine our relapse prevention plan. What is it that went wrong, and what's my new plan?
So is relapse just a part of this disease?
Unfortunately, sometimes it just is. Yeah.
Now, sometimes I thought there was just a huge percentage of people that can be expected to relapse, even after going through, again, you know, listening to these celebrities, they've been through multiple, you know, episodes of rehab and treatment.
Yeah, I think each person is different. I've seen people that got sober and clean and have managed to stay that way for years and years and years and never relapsed, and then I've seen people that just struggle. So it kind of depends on the person, and then also comorbid types of conditions like depression, anxiety, you know, those types of things can certainly influence that as well. Maybe I'm using to self-medicate a bit. And so when I have these stressful things happen, like family issues and holidays and all of that, it's more likely that I might end up self-soothing in that manner. So.
Well, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that was one of the questions I wanted to get to, was comorbid issues such as depression, anxiety. What do you see with addicts when they get adequate treatment for something such as that? And I've even talked to service people who've treated their PTSD with alcohol.
Oh, yes.
We know that's a very common thing, especially, you know, in the older gentlemen, you know, from World War II or whatever, you know, that they didn't have the kinds of treatment for PTSD. They just turned to alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's self-soothing.
So do you often see, I guess the question then would be, do you often see where if an addict gets those comorbid conditions taken care of, it might assist in getting off the substance?
Absolutely. Sometimes it's hard to see what triggered what. Sometimes it's maybe the alcoholism or the substance abuse isn't a primary condition. Maybe the PTSD triggered that, and so we've got some more self-soothing types of things going on, so we treat the PTSD and the alcohol goes away. But sometimes it is a primary illness, and yeah.
So if you're saying alcohol is a primary illness, does the alcohol or the substance abuse lead to anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, certainly relationship issues, I'm sure?
Absolutely. If somebody has been actively using alcohol, methamphetamine, these types of things, they look depressed, they look anxious, because alcohol acts on the dopamine receptor site and also depletes serotonin from the brain. Serotonin is the neurotransmitter responsible for making us feel happy and good. And so if I stop drinking, then my serotonin levels eventually are going to bounce back up, that type of thing. And so maybe what looks like depression is really I've just been drinking on a regular basis. So.
Well, I can't let you go without asking you to tell us what the difference between addiction and abuse of substances is.
Addiction is what we consider the alcoholism in the past. So what we would call dependence, alcohol dependence versus alcohol abuse. Alcohol abuse is I'm just doing things to where they're causing consequences. Alcohol dependence means I'm dependent on the substance. You don't necessarily have to have the physical dependence signs to be dependent in terms of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. But loss of control, tolerance, withdrawal, and continuing to do these things despite the negative consequences, all of those things are characteristics of dependence. Versus abuse, maybe I made a bad choice one night and got a DUI, I did a little bit of binge drinking in college, something on that manner would be more the abuse, something that doesn't necessarily stay. Once you have the diagnosis of chemical dependency or the dependence, that's something that is considered the disease, the lifelong illness, versus abuse, something that doesn't necessarily always lead to dependence.
So is just a situation then of abusing a substance something that really needs treatment? Because I know sometimes there's a confusion, and maybe the addict themselves are saying, well, I'm not an addict, I'm just abusing, you know, because sometimes they know more of the terminology than we do.
Yeah, I think so.
So is that something that also requires treatment, or is it just something kind of like the college kid that's going to grow out of it? They're abusing alcohol every weekend or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know that it necessarily requires treatment, but I think that anybody that has a issue that they want to come in and work on, life issues, whatever, I think therapy is helpful, but I'm a therapist, so hey, that's, yeah.
Well, exactly. Well, and then I also have to ask you, because I've seen some situations where a married couple, if you have one who's an addict and the other spouse, the spouse that isn't, that oftentimes doesn't work. Sometimes that marriage will end up breaking up. But I've also seen them where they're both drinking together or they're both using pills or whatever it is together. That seems to work. What's that all about?
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting how that happens. But eventually there's life consequences for both if there truly is an addiction under there. But yeah.
You have seen that? I mean, you know, even long term, some people just seem to go on their merry way being addicts and alcoholics together.
Yeah, I do see that. So,
is there some term for that or some name for that, like codependent dysfunction, something?
Yeah. Actually, the codependency would be more the first one, where although there can be codependency in both situations there, but basically, I am dependent on this other person for my functioning. Right, I am living my life to try to help this addict and to make everything seem normal, and that's the way the family gets. We have these specific roles that kind of tend to develop in the family, and some of it is just the enabling system of the codependent, but also in children we've got the family hero, the one that does everything right, and so they're less likely to maybe receive help. You've got the scapegoat, the one that tends to get in trouble, calls the duck a duck, you know, that type of thing, and so they're more apt to get into the addictions in the future, and then you've got the lost child, the one that's kind of off in the corner, reading, not doing, involving themselves in the family much, and then the mascot, the family clown, the one that it's all super cute, funny, the lampshade on the head type of kid, and so yeah, we have these things develop that are ways to cope with the addiction in the family. So.
And I'm so glad you brought the children into this, and what can you leave us with, Summer? What can you tell anyone who might be considering going for treatment? Let's talk directly to the addict of what they can do or what encouragement you can give them to really address this as we come into the new year.
Yeah, I think that addiction is very much something that is treatable, and so it's hopeful. If you come in and we work on it, we can develop a plan. I think it's important to have a plan and a structure behind it. Exercise is excellent because it kind of has a natural high, so if we implement some exercise, that's a great thing. change the associations that we have. So sometimes we have the playgrounds and the playmates that were associated with the addiction.